This is Lionel Messi's first professional league goal in 2005, and this is one of his latest. Between these two moments, football witnessed one of the most significant tactical evolutions of any player in history. One player, several distinct roles, and a complete reimagining of what's possible on a football pitch. This is the story of Lionel Messi's tactical transformation. When we think of Messi, certain images immediately spring to mind. The inverted winger, the false nine, the creator. But long before any of these iterations, there's a version of Messi that time has almost forgotten. A near-traditional left winger. Rosario, Argentina, in the late 90s. A time when football was a lot simpler, when wingers stuck to their natural side and their job description was clearer. Hug the touchline, beat your fullback, and get supply into the box. That's what was expected of many wingers at the time. The footage from those days is grainy but fascinating. A tiny, scrawny boy with a mop of black hair, already showing that supernatural ability to keep the ball glued to his feet. But this wasn't the Messi we'd come to know. When he played on the left, he was more conventional, playing on his natural side. And yet, even then, something wasn't quite right about the setup. Not wrong exactly, but inefficient. Here was a player of extraordinary talent, and keeping him confined to the touchline felt like putting an F1 car in a school zone. His coaches could see it. Despite his physical limitations, and they were significant at the time, Messi was clearly a reference point of every attack, the player everyone looked to. The solution as he aged at Newell's Old Boys and into La Masia was the enganche role, that quintessentially Argentine position of the classical 10, operating between midfield and attack. It wasn't a radical shift for one so young. Messi had constantly flitted between the left and the center throughout his youth, but it was becoming increasingly obvious. Why limit him to one side of the pitch when you could place him at the very heart of the action? By the time he made his debut, the new camp was shaking with anticipation. Rumors of a talented young boy they had poached from faraway shores had long been whispered, and the Blaugrana were bristling with anticipation. But Messi would have to begin his many adaptations instantly, as Frank Rijkaard, in the mold of Barcelona, utilized a 4-3-3. This meant that there was no number 10 position. His second favorite position in his younger years, out on the left, might have been a possibility, were it not for the fact that Barcelona had a much more established name in that position. The best player in world football, Ronaldinho. And Ronaldinho not only took up Messi's preferred position on the pitch, he was also more likely to be the man who would drift into the central positions in the final third to look to make all of the difference, whilst Messi was on the wing. Ronaldinho was the star of the team, and rightfully so, as his body of work meant that he had the trust of his side, and he would be the point of reference that his teammates would look to find. But let's not get carried away. Messi wasn't some outcast flung out on the right wing that the team would look to avoid. He was more than involved in the attacking play, and particularly as his debut season morphed into his second season, he began to showcase his talents more and more. But he was still quite raw, and Rijkaard for the most part wanted the young Argentine to get chalk on his boots, providing the width for the team. His biggest weapons at this age were, as always, his dribbling ability, and that was coupled with his raw pace. And while not perfect, a young Messi was already terrorizing fullbacks across Spain, with his chief mandate being to get past his marker and look to threaten the goal. But the rawness was still there, as at times Messi's head was down for too long, too focused on going towards the goal, which he did well, but his decision-making was one part of the game that still needed work, as at times he would not spot his teammates in a better position, or would go for the dribble when a more direct route was available. He only played 7 league matches in his debut campaign, but in his second, where his career truly began, he scored 6 and assisted twice in 17 games. In 06-07, his goal-scoring instincts were on full display, as he exploded to 14 goals and 2 assists in 26 games. But why did he only play 57% of the minutes available in his first 2 seasons? Messi was facing one huge obstacle. His growth hormone deficiencies well documented, meaning that at a certain point, Messi looked like he would be unable to reach a decent stature required to thrive at the top of the game. The solution was, of course, to give Messi medically approved growth hormone treatment, which saw him shoot up in height. The problem that comes with rapid growth is muscular imbalance as the body adjusts. That paired with the big knocks he took in youth football, as well as early in professional football as his peers tested him, meant that his body was struggling at times.
He was taking on players that with so much ease. They had to follow him so hard to stop him.
A hamstring strain and a pulled thigh meant that he missed 18 league games in 05-06. The following season, it was a metatarsal injury that kept him out of 11 league games. But these struggles led to refinement. As he progressed under Frank Rijkaard, subtle changes were beginning to emerge until it was clear we were seeing a different version of Messi. Those early days of hugging the touchline head down and purely looking to get past his fullback were replaced with more sophisticated movements. Messi always knew how to exploit his marker 1 versus 1, but now he was beginning to show that he could manipulate entire defensive structures. A combination of more trust from the manager, experience, growing confidence meant that Messi was taking his game to the next level. Now, when he received the ball, his first touch wasn't always to take the ball down the touchline or to immediately look to take on his man. He began to take touches inside, opening up the pitch and giving himself more passing options. The right winger was beginning to evolve into something more, and if it looked like a slow, natural adaptation, the arrival of Dani Alves in 2008 and the departure of starman Ronaldinho in that same year was like adding rocket fuel to this evolution. Now, there was increased responsibility on his shoulders to fill the creative burden left by Ronaldinho, but he had already proven that he was a special talent capable of filling it. With Dani Alves overlapping outside of him and Eto'o stretching defenses ahead of him and creating space in the midfield, Messi began to thrive in this inside right space, cutting in more and more often on his left foot to have more of the pitch opened up to him. He was now beginning to have more of an impact on play, getting more touches on the ball, slowly becoming a reference point in the side, and combining with his midfielders Iniesta and Xavi behind him. He now had his head up, and it was no longer just about goals. We were beginning to see shades of Messi the creator. The numbers showed this, as in 07-08 he hit double digits for assists, and it was one of only 2 seasons in his career where he had more assists than goals. In 08-09, Messi was beginning to blend his newfound creative spark and his goal-scoring pursuits of his earlier years, as he assisted 13 but scored 23, and for the first time he exceeded a goal contribution per game. But just as Messi's rise to the top looked unstoppable, came the most tumultuous time in his career, and it threatened to derail his explosive growth. In the absence of Ronaldinho and fully entrusted by his manager Pep Guardiola, that little kid from Rosario had grown accustomed to being the main man, the one entrusted to be the difference in the final third. Alves, aggressive as ever, provided all the width, meaning that Messi only moved wide when he felt it would be optimal to exploit a weakness in the opposition flanks. But Messi was fully happy drifting further and further inside, and Eto'o running in behind or even out wide at times would only serve to grow that space. But then Eto'o was replaced by Zlatan, and now the central space that Messi loved was crowded, because Zlatan was not making the runs in behind to create space for Messi. In fact, he was dropping into similar areas and demanding more of the ball, taking away from Messi. This proved to be a line in the sand in Messi's tactical evolution. He refused to budge, and it was Zlatan who ended up leaving the club, and now Guardiola helped Messi commit to a tactical change that would define an era of world football. No longer was it about Messi drifting in and having a forward creating space ahead of him. Messi would have to start central and create the space for himself with no forward ahead of him. And so we saw the rise of false nine Messi, and it started against their biggest rivals. Guardiola had been watching Real Madrid obsessively. He noticed their centre-backs struggled with the decision of whether to follow forwards who dropped deep. The space between their midfield and defensive line was a weakness waiting to be exploited. The implementation came in May 2009, in perhaps the most significant tactical experiment in modern football history, El Clasico at the Bernabeu. But it wasn't some haphazard experiment done as a last resort. This was the culmination of years of development. Those seasons exploring the half spaces from the right wing had taught Messi how to receive the ball with his back to goal. The combinations with Xavi and Iniesta had developed his understanding of how to create overloads in the midfield. Even his early days as a 10 in his youth had given him a natural feel for finding pockets of space between the lines. But what made false nine Messi different from previous attempts at the role was the combination of skills he brought to it. Previous false nines like Totti were primarily creators, dropping deep to orchestrate play. Messi was that and more. A dribbler who could eliminate multiple defenders, a finisher who could score from any angle, and now a playmaker who could split defenses with a single pass. The role itself was beautifully complex in its simplicity. Messi would start as the central striker, but immediately drop into the midfield when Barcelona had possession. This created a cascade of problems for defenders. Follow him, and you leave space for Pedro, Henry, or Villa to exploit. Stay in position, and you give one of history's greatest players time and space between the lines. Double mark him, and you leave Xavi and Iniesta with extra space to control the game. Opposition teams tried to adapt. They'd seen enough of false nine Messi to develop counter strategies. For example, having a midfielder man-mark him, or dropping their entire defensive block so that the space between the lines almost disappeared. But this just led to new innovations. When he was man-marked, Messi started making more explosive movements. He dropped deep, dragging his marker with him, then suddenly accelerate into the space behind. Those years of playing on the wing hadn't been forgotten. He was still lethal in 1v1 situations. Only now, these scenarios were unfolding in central areas where goals were more likely. The 11-12 season wasn't just Messi's peak, it was perhaps the peak of what's possible on a football pitch. 73 goals in a single season tells part of the story. But even that absurd number doesn't capture what we were witnessing. This was tactical evolution perfected, a player who had mastered every aspect of attacking football. Think about what the false nine role demanded: the spatial awareness to find pockets between the lines, the close control to operate in tight spaces, the passing range to release runners, the finishing ability to convert chances, and the decision-making to know when to do which. Messi wasn't just good at all of these things, he was the best in the world at each of them. As Pep Guardiola departed, Messi continued to tweak the false nine role. The most fascinating aspect of this period was how Messi's decision-making evolved. Early in his false nine days, he would almost always drop deep, but only when Barcelona had possession. Now he was mixing it up. Sometimes he'd stay high, pinning the centre-backs, other times he'd drift into the channels. The predictable patterns were gone, replaced by a fluid interpretation of space and opportunity. The physical demands of the role were immense. Messi wasn't just moving vertically between the lines anymore. He was covering an entire attacking third, yet somehow his efficiency improved. He became a master at conserving his energy, picking his moments to explode into life. And where the young Messi was all about hassling and harrying the opponent, defensively now he stood still. This wasn't just about tactical evolution anymore, it was about physical optimization. The MSN era began with what seemed like a tactical step backwards. After years of Messi mastering the false nine role, Luis Enrique's arrival, along with the signing of Luis Suarez, posed a fascinating tactical question. How do you incorporate the world's best number 9 when the world's best player has been excelling in that same space for years? And if you've gotten this far into the video, you're probably a true tactical nerd. And if you've ever wanted to understand the tactical principles that allow elite teams to function, I've put together a free resource to get you started on your tactical analysis journey. Just click the top link in the description or the comments. The initial solution was clunky, to say the least. Suarez was pushed out to the right wing whilst Messi remained central. A decision that looked like it might work on paper, but failed to maximize Suarez's strengths. The Uruguayan was neutered out wide. But then came the moment that would reshape football. Luis Enrique made a decision that kept him awake the night before the first time he did it. He moved Messi back to the right wing. On the surface, this looked like regression. Why move the best player in the world away from the position where he'd scored 73 in a single season? The positional shift worked because it wasn't really about positions at all. While nominally he did start on the right, Messi had complete freedom to drift wherever he saw space, and the combinations were beautiful. When Messi dropped deep, Suarez's movement would pin the defense back, preventing them from stepping up to press Leo. Meanwhile, Neymar would drift inside from the left, creating a direct passing option. If teams committed midfielders to press Messi, they left space for Neymar. If they sat deep to deny space, they'd give Messi more time to orchestrate. Their connection transcended tactics. We became inseparable, we got along really well, and we knew what to do. We had a great friendship. What I miss about Barcelona is playing with Messi and Suarez, Neymar would go on to say. And you could see it in their play. The no-look passes, the dummy runs, the celebrations. These were three of the world's best players, genuinely enjoying making each other look good. For all their technical ability, the real magic was in the rotations. One moment Suarez was darting wide, dragging his centre-back. The next, Messi exploded into the space. Neymar would come short, pulling his fullback forward, creating space for Messi to release a diagonal in behind. Every movement had a purpose, and every run created space for someone else. Under Luis Enrique, Barca became more direct, more vertical, more ruthless. The possession was still there, but now it had a different purpose: to get the ball to one of the front three as quickly as possible and let them create chaos. And Messi became that first connection, moving into the center of the pitch to play the initial pass. It was his first foray into his future role as primary conductor, as his average passes per game and through balls attempted shot up alongside Neymar and Suarez. The Post MSN era is fascinating because it tells us as much about Barcelona's decline as it does about Messi's continued evolution. Neymar was gone, Suarez was aging, but we witnessed something both remarkable and somewhat tragic: Messi transforming himself into practically an entire attack by himself. It wasn't an instant change. Initially under Valverde, there was an attempt to maintain some semblance of the old structure. But in those early post-Neymar matches, you'll see something telling. Messi dropping deeper and deeper to get on the ball. And this wasn't the calculated drops of his false 9 days. This was a necessity. The team needed him to be everywhere. By 2018, we're seeing something unprecedented in football. A player who was simultaneously his team's best goalscorer, creator, and progressor of the ball. The connection with Jordi Alba became Barcelona's primary attacking weapon. Messi would drop into midfield almost to the halfway line at times, scan for Alba's run, and then unleash those trademark diagonal passes behind the defense. It worked for a while. The 18-19 season saw Barcelona come out on top domestically, but there was an underlying fragility to it all. The team had become almost entirely dependent on Messi's individual brilliance. If he had an off day, Barcelona didn't really have a plan B. Then came the various attempts to find a solution. Coutinho was brought to provide some creative support, but never quite fit. Griezmann arrived but found himself occupying the same spaces as Messi needed, and Dembele showed flashes but couldn't stay fit. By the Koeman era, we were seeing something almost poignant. Arguably the greatest player ever, showing he could adapt his game yet again, but in service of a team that was gradually crumbling around him. The deeper positioning became almost permanent. The bursting runs became more selective. Every touch, every pass, every decision had to matter because the margin for error was so much smaller for him. They experimented with the 4-2-3-1, the 3-5-2, but they all had the same basic principle. Get the ball to Messi and hope he can create something. The connection with Alba would become almost predictable, and teams would try cut off that switch before Messi even received. But even then, they'd still pull it off. That's how good the execution had become, but it was also a sign of how one-dimensional Barcelona's attack had become. True Messi dependencia. We were also seeing a physical evolution. The explosive runs from the MSN days were gone, replaced by a more methodical approach. Messi had mastered the art of walking football, knowing exactly where to position himself to influence the game whilst conserving his energy. He drifted into pockets of space, scanned the field, and then either released a pass or got past a defender if the opportunity presented itself. And the arrival of youngsters like Pedri and Fati offered glimpses of what could have been. Fresh legs and minds to share the creative burden. But by then, the financial reality had caught up with Barca. The wages spent on failed Neymar replacements, the declining performances, the empty stadium during COVID, it had all come to a head. In what turned out to be Messi's final season with Barca, he showcased his brilliance, but we also saw the tragedy of his late era. He was still producing magic, still reading the game at a level that few could comprehend. But increasingly, we're seeing a maestro trying to keep afloat, a team that was breaking down around him. The tactical evolution had come full circle, from being the centerpiece in Guardiola's perfect system to trying to be an entire system by himself. The PSG chapter of Messi's evolution is fascinating because it showed us something we hadn't seen before. Messi having to adapt to a system rather than a system adapting to him. Under Poch, PSG initially tried to use Messi in two distinct ways. In a 4-2-3-1, he'd operate as the attacking midfielder, while against tougher opposition, they'd switch to a 4-3-3, with Messi nominally on the right. But here's where things get interesting and problematic. The same player who had mastered the art of dropping deep was now being asked to do it even more in Paris, because PSG's midfield was functional in trying to make up for the lack of defensive solidity of the front three. The numbers tell the story. In his first PSG season, Messi's touches in the midfield third actually increased compared to his final Barca year, but his receipts of progressive passes dropped. He was becoming the progressor rather than the receiver, exactly the opposite of what made him so lethal in the final third at his peak at Barca. This misalignment showed in his output, with just 6 goals in 26 appearances in 21-22, a return we hadn't seen since his teenage years. But even in this poor season, Messi's underlying numbers remained elite. He hit the woodwork 10 times, and he actually increased his assist numbers from his final Barca season. The arrival of Christophe Galtier in 22-23 brought another fascinating evolution. They switched to a back 3, and occasionally a narrow 4-3-1-2, which changed everything. Now Messi was in closer proximity to his fellow attackers, with the width being provided by wing-backs. This meant he could focus on finding pockets of space between the lines, rather than having to worry about providing width himself. The new system also solves the build-up issues. With 4 players in the midfield, either by default or Messi and Neymar dropping in as the dual 10s, PSG could create a box structure that usually guaranteed a free man in the midfield. When opponents pressed the PSG pivots, either Messi or Neymar would be free between the lines, and this played perfectly to Messi's evolved game. He could still drop deep when needed, but was no longer required to be both the progressor and finisher of moves. And now we find ourselves in Miami, watching perhaps the final act of football's greatest maestro. There's something poetic about how Messi's evolution has come full circle. From the boy who needed protection in those early Barca days, to the warrior who carried entire teams on his shoulders, and now he's entered a phase where once again, the team exists to protect and serve him. But this time, by design rather than necessity. His teammates understand their role, work hard for him defensively, create space, and trust that when the moment comes, the old magic will still be there, for Messi to make the difference. The evolution is almost complete as we enter the final days of Messi's career, but it has been a beautiful journey. And if you want to get started in tactical analysis yourself, don't forget to check out that top link in the description.